Hello and welcome to the White Witch podcast with me, Carly. Hope you are all well, witches. It is good to be back. On today's episode, I have an interview with my long-suffering counsellor, Sue Rochford. Don't worry, we are not here to talk about the inner workings of my mind. That would be truly terrifying. No. We are here because Sue also works as a psychic medium alongside her work as a counsellor. And she kindly agreed to come onto the show to discuss her gift and how she uses it. She also provides much insight into how we can all understand what our own psychic gift is, how we can use it, and also gives us some amazing accounts of what she has seen within her work. To kick off today's episode, we have our book review. The book is The Book of English Magic, written by Philip Carr-Gomm and Richard Heygate. This book blew my mind. My brother gifted it to me for Christmas, following me asking him for any books he could recommend in regards to the Golden Dawn and so on. So this book is genuinely one of the best factual books I have read around magic and very different to many I have read so far. And I'll explain this by saying I know many of the books I've already read relating to the craft have mainly been written by women, and many relate to hedge witchcraft, kitchen witchcraft, deities, and so on. I loved this book because it's written by two men and it had more of a masculine take on different areas of the craft. It delves into the druids, alchemy, magicians, the Freemasons, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Rosicrucians, Aleister Crowley, Gerald Gardner. There was bits on Maxine Sanders, necromancy, cunning folk. It was just a great take from a different angle, and I loved it. I have read a huge amount of books about the craft, and this one is chunky. It covered a lot of aspects, but I learned so much from this, and much of my interest has, like I say, always been within the hedge witch side of things. However, this book has set me off on a quest to learn more, record some episodes in regards to areas such as the Golden Dawn, the druids, magicians, and so on. They are all aspects of the craft and magic that I have always had an interest in, but I just feel it's kind of coming to the forefront at this moment in time, and I'm embracing it. I loved the interviews that are within the book with modern day witches and magicians and so on. I found these so inspiring and shows magic very much exists in the modern day, as I'm sure we all know and feel. One of my favourite that has inspired me hugely was one from Cassandra Latham, who is a witch based in a tiny cottage known as the Doll's House, said to be tucked away in a narrow alley in the village of St. Berrien near Penzance in Cornwall. And she earns her living as a village wise woman who declares her occupation on her tax return as a witch. So once I read that, I changed my job title within my tax documents and so on to witch immediately. The lady I spoke to about my tax reports and changing my title was so supportive too. I know she was witchy. I got those vibes after that. And it's so liberating that we have now reached a time where we aren't going to be burnt at the stake for being witches. Actually having a conversation with somebody in a government body that you can say, actually, I want you to change my title to witch, because every single piece of work I do is related to the craft, from content through to spell and energy work I do with clients. So it made sense and it felt right. And I don't know, it might be a bit out there, but it felt natural. And again, if we think back to cunning folk of old, wise women and so on, I guess that would have been their identity, and that's what I'd like to identify as. Anyway, enough about that. It's worth reading all about Cassandra Latham in the book. I definitely loved her account and have gone on to find out more about her. This book gives some great information on each aspect of magic, and I'm certain I will reference this book when it comes to the podcast. I loved the things to do, the resources section at the end of each chapter. It gives you a great start to follow up with your research, places to visit, to take a deep dive into things further. I thought I might read you a section of the book on how to make herbal remedies within the cunning folk section that I felt was a great basic take on it that you might want to try. Many cunning folk operated a successful front as herbalists, offering them more magical solutions to clients behind closed doors. Some simple remedies that would have been used by cunning folk can be safely made at home. To make an infused drink of hawthorn brandy that can be beneficial to the heart, try filling a jar 1/4 to 1/3 full of hawthorn berries and then top the jar up with brandy. Store in the dark and shake daily. After a month or so, the brandy will be ready to drink and will have a delicious woodland flavour. To make a herbal tincture, use the highest proof alcohol available, which is usually brandy or vodka. If you do not drink alcohol, use vinegar. Pick nettles, which add as a good tonic, and macerate the fresh or dried leaves with a mortar and pestle or a knife. Fill 2/3 of a scrupulously clean jar that has an airtight seal with the bruised leaves. Pour the alcohol or vinegar over the herbs so that they are just covered. Label the jar and place in a dark room or cupboard for a full lunar month. Every day, shake the jar vigorously, concentrating on the idea that by doing this, you are helping the plant release its powers. When the moon is full, take your jar and leave it outside all night so that your tincture can be charged with the magical powers of moonlight. At the end of the lunar month, filter through muslin or a paper coffee filter and store in a dark place. To use your tincture with an eyedropper, add about 20 drops to a glass of water and drink it immediately. Join me after the break for our conversation with Sue Rochford about Beyond the Veil. Welcome back. So I am so excited because on today's podcast, I have Sue, who is my counsellor, my long-suffering counsellor. Hello, Sue. How are you?
Hi, Carly. It's lovely to be with you today.
So I'm so glad you're here. I'm so excited to have you on. I've known Sue for probably around 7 years now, and I genuinely can say might get a bit emotional having her on because it's been a bit of a journey. And Sue started out as my counsellor, and I'm probably not allowed to say this, but she to me is far more than that because she changed a lot of my life mental health wise. I can definitely say that, Sue. Sue was the first counsellor I had ever had any success working with mental health wise. After being referred to counsellors as a teenager, never ever managed to get on really with anyone that I work with. And I think a large part of that is because Sue has the counselling knowledge and experience to a T, but she also has such a spiritual side. And I'm going to learn a lot about Sue today. So Sue, could you give us a bit of insight into what you do aside from just being my long-suffering counsellor?
Well, actually, I've enjoyed being your counsellor. You're a joy to work with. You really have been. But I suppose, yeah, that's one side. I suppose we've not talked about, is it my spiritual or that side of me? Because I keep the two very separate, my counselling work and my kind of spiritual side, because they kind of, but I suppose in some ways they go hand in hand. But I don't know, I suppose I've seen spirits since I was a young child. I have kind of very early memories of being in a cot and seeing spirit around me and I went to boarding school. I suppose I was about 8. I went to convent school, and it was in a castle, boarding school. And as you can imagine, it was very haunted, lots of stuff going on there. So we always saw and heard things there. And I kind of think that carried on throughout my life. I just saw weird things, had weird things happen. I knew things that I shouldn't have really known. I astral traveled. So I went to places and saw things. And so knew stuff that happened that I couldn't possibly know, strange things like that. And it kind of quietened down during my teenage years. And I'd have the odd bit of activity or something happen. And then when I was about 17, things kicked off again. I always remember I was sharing a flat in Sandgate. And my flatmate used to tell me off, Carly, for chopping cucumber on the side. She used to say, use the chopping board. And I'd always forget. I'd kind of just quickly chop some cucumber to go on my crackers or whatever. And I remember this one day I was just about to, she kept moaning at me, and I was just about to chop some cucumber on the side, and this chopping board flew off the drainer and hit me on the back of the head. Yeah.
No.
And I started having like things like that. And then when I had my children quite young. When I had them, I'd start having things happen, like, ashtrays would fly across the room, plates. I'd have things in my bathroom fly around and end up in the bath. And it got to the point actually where nobody would come around my house because they were just afraid of having it thrown at them. And we had a priest out to exorcise the house, and that didn't work. And so we sold the house and moved, and not realizing at the time that kind of what was going on. When we moved, it just carried on. And I ended up having a medium come out and through a friend, and he said, well, they're trying to get your attention, Sue, because you can do this. Yeah, so that's kind
of that's so intense. And I guess I never thought about it, that's why they're acting like that, to get your attention, because you've got that ability.
Yeah, absolutely. And because of my kids are all very psychic too, so of course when they're born it kind of trebled the energy. And yeah, so
your kids are as well, so you've just literally had a house full of all of you picking up messages and yeah, they're all very different ways, kind of, they're all open. And so yeah. This is all new to me. This is all new information to me. We've never, ever obviously got into any of this side of it, and I'm really excited to hear all about this. So Sue, like, as a psychic medium, obviously that person told you. Was that the first time you realized you were psychic in respect to picking up messages and so on, not just the activity? Like, when did you first realize, actually, I've got this gift or curse, or however you might see it?
Yeah, well, I always used to think I was oversensitive. So I always used to think that, and I kind of just assumed that everybody could pick up on how people were feeling. So I always assumed that was just normal, because I'd know if someone didn't like me, or if someone kind of, or if someone wasn't telling me the truth, or I've always had this kind of knowing, or this kind of energy in that way. So it was actually lovely to find out that kind of I wasn't going mad in some way. Some of the stuff that was happening, and I'd hear the voices, or you'd see things that it wasn't just me kind of being a little bit mentally ill, or in some way like that, because you do start to think that maybe you hear about schizophrenia and all these different things, and you think that maybe there's something like that going on. So to have somebody come along and say, well, no, actually it's quite normal, and explained to me more. And then when I sat on Circle, it kind of all started to sink in. I learned to link with my guide, and it was quite wonderful after that. It's nice for it just all settle in, and you start to feel normal.
I really second that, because I myself, my I don't have the same ability as you do, but my grandma is very psychic, but like you, she always kind of before she realized, it was always like, am I okay mentally? Is this, where is this coming from? And she's never really explored it. She's never ever confidently used it. And I have over the course of time realized that I have exactly the same way that things come through to me psychically, but I've embraced it. But I've seen my nan, and that's why I kind of said the gift and the curse, because my nan has always seen it as a curse. Yeah, I see it more as a gift. And like you, I pick up a lot of messages about people even saying things, and especially feelings. So, and actually wanted to get into the different forms of how you pick up messages, because for me, I can pick up if somebody's not well, or if they are like repressed or if there's any anger or resentment, I have spent time with somebody and literally come away wanting, actually physically crying and not knowing why I want to cry, and my throat has really hurt. And I've realized after, because they were going for a situation where they're really repressed in a relationship and their marriage, and they couldn't talk and say what they wanted to say. And I was like, oh my goodness, every time I've been around you when that was going on, I kept knowing it wasn't my energy. So when you finally realize, you're like, oh, I'm not, you know, it's quite a lot. And like you say, when you realize actually this isn't, you know, this isn't my energy, this is somebody else's that I've picked up. It's like quite the only time I knew that I was psychic at some level was I rang my daughter's school the minute that she had been in an incident and she'd got hurt. And I rang up the school and left a voicemail saying, this is really bonkers. I don't really know why I'm ringing you, but I feel I need to call you because I think something's wrong. And all the teachers at my daughter's school were like, your mum's a witch. She's like, but yeah, like you say, it's when you know, and then you're like, okay, now I know, and now I can kind of hone this and accept I'm not losing the plot.
No, and that's nice, isn't it? Because actually I think we've all got this kind of ability that kind of we forget about, that we don't realize, and we're always picking up. I think energy is so important, what we pick up from others, and like you say, kind of when you're in a healing frame, you do pick up and you become a mirror in a way, because your body starts to kind of get in touch with what the other person is feeling. So you start to, like you say, feel restricted in your throat, or you can feel it within you, kind of what's going on for that other person. And I find that very much when I'm doing kind of my counseling work or any of my work, that I pick up on in a physical way, and I can get to the end of the week, and sometimes I used to get to Friday and I used to just cry for an hour, just because of all everything that you're carrying from everybody. And I kind of think that it's important, Carly, as you're doing this, to learn to kind of, like, you know, to kind of accept that and learn how to kind of shift that from you and let go of that.
And protect yourself. I'm really bad at that. And actually, you could probably give me some insight into what you do because like you say, I truly believe that we all have this ability, and we'll have different clairsenses that are stronger. But it's sorry, go on. Sorry, lovely.
It's very much like, you know, like say somebody's learning to play a violin. Some people can pick it up and play it straight away. Some people have to practice, and some people never get the hang of it. And it's kind of like that, because my belief is that we're all spirit in a human body. So as that, we're able to connect with spirits, or we're able to connect with that spiritual side of ourselves, or, you know, to that kind of part that lights us up, that part that kind of, and just some people are better at it or more natural at it than others, and some people have to work harder at it. And some people are more natural healers, some are more clairsentient. You know, we've all got different gifts, and we use them in different ways. And I think it's important also to learn that. What's your gift? How can you work with it?
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you, in terms of picking up on other people's energy in general, whether or not you think you are psychic in any form, or, you know, just generally, what do you recommend for grounding and trying not to pick up and take on everybody's energy? Because I struggle with that.
Yeah, because actually it's of no benefit. You taking on somebody else's energy does them no benefits. It's no, all it does is does you harm. So it's really good to learn, and I'm just as bad. I forget to do it sometimes. But the best thing is to ground yourself, and when you ground yourself, a really good way is just to imagine I'm like a tree. So from my feet, the roots are going down into the earth, connecting with, you know, Mother Earth, connecting with a rock or an oak tree somewhere. Or as you spread those roots down, you're grounding yourself. So you're connecting yourself kind of with the earth and the energy. And I kind of imagine breathing that in and filling myself up with that. So that grounds me. And then I imagine a really good thing is, I say to some people, you know, like a army sleeping bag. So imagine zipping yourself up over your head and filling that with a white light. Or some people don't like to feel, they kind of think, oh, that feels a bit claustrophobic. So imagine a bubble that you can see through. But as long as it's all around you, and you're putting that intention there, surrounded by white light, because nothing dark can exist in light. So when you create that light, it can only, you know what I mean, expel. And then what happens then is, it's not that you don't take on other people's, it's that negative energy doesn't enter your arena, doesn't stay with you. But I think they're the easiest ways.
I absolutely need to practice on that. And another one tip somebody else gave me, another psychic, is to if you've got some particularly negative or harmful around you, you know, that you can't kind of escape from that situation at the time, is to envisage mirrors deflecting back to them, which is kind of quite nice, because it's a bit like, take back what you're giving to me and see what you're doing as well. So there's a kind of accountability and lesson there.
Yeah. And I always say to somebody, because when people are drawing your energy as well, I'll flick by my tummy, because quite often when they're drawing your energy, they're drawing it from your solar plexus. So sometimes if you suddenly realize, because people don't realize they're being psychic vampires or that they're drawing. So sometimes it's just about flicking that energy and then wrapping yourself again, because they don't mean to take from you, but actually it does you no good giving that, you know what I mean, kind of energy. So I just flick my stomach sometimes, just as if symbolically to say, yep, I'm not kind of giving any more now, and then I wrap myself. But it's about it's about practicing these things and just looking after you.
And actually, it's funny, because I've got a friend who I was talking to today, and she's really, and I think we've all got this light force, this aura around us, and she's such a positive person, like, as most of my friends, fortunately, like, I've learned that lesson to be really careful who you spend a lot of time with. She's got this light, you know, people are drawn to her because of that light, and she's trying to work on boundaries to not kind of be drained of it, because we had a similar conversation that people don't realize they're doing it, but they do want your light. You know, we are attracted to things when they are bright and light and happy and so on, and it's just trying to work on those boundaries energetically, and it's difficult. It comes, I'm always working on that. It's hard.
And you find that people who are that way, who give light, or light workers, or however you want it, always feel the need to give too much sometimes, because they're wounded healers themselves. So quite often they being of need or of service is something that fulfills them. And so it's really hard to find that line where you're not giving too much, or where you're not kind of, because actually in some ways it makes us feel good to help. It makes us feel fulfilled, or it kind of, you know, our purpose is aligned at that point. But it's really difficult to find that fine line between giving too much, isn't it, and of yourself, or too much of that light, and also looking after yourself in that way. So
absolutely resound with this, definitely. Mine is, when I do sessions, I'll always try to give like 1000%, and I'll end up staying on the session too long, and I get told off, you know, with the wellbeing center I work with, and I'm like, I know, it's just that side of you where you just want to give it, you know, give it all, but you shouldn't. It's true.
Yeah. No, because
honestly, it's a work in progress.
No, but you learn these things, I think, as you go along, and you realize that setting boundaries is important in any kind of working relationship, or any kind of, there has to be boundaries, and because actually that makes that person feel safe too. They know what's going on, they know whether, you know, and I kind of think that's always important, to look after them and you, is to kind of create
absolutely. Genuinely, this is resounding so much with me, and I'm sure so many other people, regardless if they, you know, do work within this realm, or just in general, like energetically, with all the people around us, because it comes up with every single interaction, be it work, family, relationships, love relationships. It's always a thing that comes up, and you know, the healthier and happier you feel when you are respecting those energetic boundaries and having them respected. I'm really curious in terms of how you have messages come through from the other side, and perhaps what clair senses are strongest for you, if that's, you know, the case with any in particular.
I kind of think I'm very lucky that I kind of have been given the ability to use lots of different gifts. I started actually as a psychic artist. So when I first did platform work, I started off as a psychic artist. So I'd work with a medium. I'd faces would appear, and I'd draw them, and they'd be for the person who the medium was giving the reading to. And then it was just one time the medium didn't turn, and she said, well, you're doing the mediumship and I'm going somewhere else. So that's how I kind of started off doing more mediumship. So I'm very lucky that I'm able to link in lots of ways. But for me, the strongest is knowing. I just know, and there's it's kind of like a sense of knowing, and I see and I hear, but mostly I just know, and I know in a way. It's hard to describe actually, because it's not like a knowing or kind of, because I see with that knowing and I hear with that knowing, but it's just kind of, it's all wrapped up into to one. So I think I'm very lucky that it comes quite naturally in that way, that I don't have to kind of meditate for 20 minutes, or kind of, it just kind of sits and comes in, and I just trust. I think trust is the main thing, Carly. Trusting that kind of, I've got the most wonderful guide who, my main guide, Zeb, who works with me. He's my gatekeeper, my main guide. There's lots of different names people use, but he's kind of, and then other guys come and work with me for different things. But I always know he's there. I feel that he's there with me. I know his energy. And I suppose he kind of like, when I'm doing readings or I'm doing platform work, he's kind of keeps everybody at bay and just lets them in one at a time, or you know what I mean, kind of.
Right, okay, because I guess it could get overwhelming if they're all trying to knock down the door and talk to you.
Absolutely. And if you can imagine, kind of, if you're doing, like, say, if you've got a big audience in front of you, and everybody's got, say, 10 or 12 loved ones or whoever, and they're all queuing up, there's a lot of noise behind you. There's a lot going on, and it kind of like, so I've got very good guides that kind of, don't let me become too overwhelmed with that. And but it's just, I'm so thankful. It's such a wonderful gift that I've been allowed to use or to help others. And I kind of think for me, that's the main thing, is to kind of show that there's life goes on, that this is not it. This is not, you know what I mean? And hopefully that brings comfort to others, to know that their loved ones that's not just it, And I kind of think, because quite often people come to this way of life, or want to come to this way of life, when they've lost somebody, when they've, especially somebody that's meant so much to them, and they want there to be more than. They have that existential crisis that kind of, there has to be more than, that can't be it. So it's wonderful to be able to kind of give that evidence, or to kind of help them find the peace in that way.
Absolutely. I obviously myself, do believe that it is a lovely thought to know, because again, myself, I've been part of Circle and had lots of things come through from my own loved ones, and just, spirit in general. But when I have a psychic that I have been to probably for like the last 8 years, like maybe 10 years or something. I don't go to see her often, but I think for me, when I saw her, and this is what I find absolutely crazy, she would pretty much word for word speak a conversation that I'd had with somebody. And that would blow my mind, the level that she could pick up things, and when I see her at times, it is very much like I'm having a conversation with my granddad, and I forget that she's there in a sense, because I'll literally be sort of asking a question, or she'll just be giving information, and it's just so reassuring. And like you say, it is just the fact that there is more to this. It's not just this, this lifetime, it's all the, I think that is massively reassuring, especially if you are grieving, and like you say, that is obviously why people do come to it. But I find it fascinating. I've always have, alongside the witchy stuff. But I wanted to ask, sorry, Sue, after you.
No, I was going to say, because I think a lot of the time people come to psychics or mediums, and they want their fortune told, or they want to know what the future holds. And the thing is it's very much, for me, it's not about that. It's about connecting you with loved ones. And quite often, you're right, people will say to me, I just had that conversation, when I give them something, or we were just talking about that. And quite often it's just spirit or your loved ones confirming, we're around, we listen to you, we listen to your thoughts, we listen to, and we're proud. And for me, reading should always be about love, about kind of healing and love, and not negativity or any kind of, and a lot of like, say, fortune telling, it's about self-fulfilling, isn't it? You tell somebody they're going to, and that'll happen. So for me, it's more about that connection with loved ones, and like you say, them confirming, yes, we heard that conversation, yes, we know what you're up to, and that kind of having that comfort of being, watched over, that there's somebody there with us, we're never alone in that way.
And I found it, again, with that conversation, one of the conversations we had, I remember thinking to myself, why were you there in the car with me and my boss having that conversation?
I know, it's strange, isn't it? Kind of,
Why not just joining us along for the journey? Where were you off to? It's just really funny.
I must admit, when I've kind of, because I've ran circles, and we have people come when they begin, and they have this, don't understand how spirit walk, and they'll kind of ask me questions like, are they there when I'm in the shower? Or
That's what everyone wants to know.
Are they there when I go to bed with my husband and things like that? I'm thinking, well, no, I don't think they'd want to be there at those times. You know what I mean? And it's just kind of, they like to be around at other times. So yeah, there's always that kind of like line, isn't there?
I think I felt this overwhelming need to behave after I'd first had a reading, and I was aware that I was like, oh goodness, no, I've got to really behave now because you're just there watching me. But it didn't last very long. But I wanted to ask you about, actually, if you are happy to say, because I guess this is very personal as well, and very sacred. Who do you work with in the spirit world, and how do you work with them? Are there any kind of ways that you need to connect with them or honor them as in, I guess, I don't know, it's like, is it akin to maybe working with a deity or a goddess, or
no,
and
they don't like well, as far as I'm kind of know, and all the spirit I've worked with, they don't like that. Zeb is my main guide, so he's kind of right. he always shows himself as like I always say Egyptian, but it's kind of like Middle Eastern kind of gentleman. So kind of and I've had him drawn. I met a wonderful psychic who just drew him, and I was like, that's what I see. That's who I see, and it's exactly how I see him, and that was wonderful to have that. So he's my main guide, and he's like, I suppose he's like my best friend, really. He's kind of like I talk to him about anything and everything, and he's just, he's there. But the most important thing, if you're going to kind of work spiritually, is to get to know the energy of your guide, not necessarily to know how they look, but to know their energy, so how they feel when they come close, Zeb gives me an extra heartbeat. It's like this extra heartbeat I feel when he comes close.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I get this I always imagine that he wraps his cloak around me and I'm safe then, or I'm in there, if I'm in, and it's like for me it's a very paternal energy. So I always feel protected, or it's like, what I mean, it's like this big kind of like energy that comes around me, and I kind of think it's really important to sit in meditation and link with your guide. There's loads of good ones on YouTube or things like that, guided meditations that you can do to link yourself with your main guide, and they don't want you to worship them because it's a partnership to them, you know what I mean? For them, when you talk to them, and we kind of think how wonderful that they look after us. And there's so many times that Zeb's kind of saved my life, and some strange things have had to happen where he's kind of stopped things, and but also kind of for them it's a privilege to work with us, to be able to come and kind of connect with the earth plane in this way and work with us. So for me it's very much like a friendship, it's a partnership. It works from both sides, and it's about kind of, I suppose, honoring that in a way where you sit with them and you thank, I'm always grateful, and I thank him for what he does. I don't always remember, but I'll try and do that before I do a reading. I sit and say a prayer. I thank them afterwards, and it's that kind of, I suppose, if you had a friend on the earth plane, how would you be with them? How would you connect with them? And it's a little bit like that kind of for me, or that's how it works for me.
And on that note, actually, I was going to ask you, you said that there are a few strange things that he's intervened with or helped you with. Is there anything you can give us along those lines for?
On my 18th birthday, I was training to be a postwoman. Would you believe? I was and I was, I think I was coming back from Sittingbourne, and the train station I was coming back from, they had one of those. It was many years ago. So they had those boards. Do you remember they used to shutter and they used to change with the either electronic? They used to shutter around and change. The wording used to change with the trains as they came in. Well, I was walking down an underpass. I was going underneath, and all of a sudden it was like somebody held me in the spot, so I couldn't move. It's like I was frozen to the spot. And it was literally my 18th birthday. I was frozen to the spot on these stairs, and I'm thinking it was like I was stuck. I couldn't. And then all of a sudden, this board fell and smashed in front of me.
Wow.
And had I continued walking, I wouldn't be here. That it would have crushed me. So I've had a few experiences like that where I can't explain it away, and I can't kind of, but where, and I had another one when my son, he was born. He was only £1.5 pounds when he was born, because he was born at he was about 24 weeks. I was 24 and a half weeks, and I'd been rushed up to hospital, and they thought, oh, there's nothing going on, we're going to leave her. And there was a doctor that come for lunch. He'd come for lunch with his friend. He'd come just to take his friend out for lunch on the ward I was in. And he saw my notes had been left out by mistake. So he was flicking through them. Not that he should have been, but he was flicking through them. And he'd said to his friend he was having lunch with, he said, we're starting this new scan. Do you think this lady would want to try the new scan out. And he said, we can ask her. So they came and saw me and they explained all of this. He said, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have been looking through your notes, but they were left out when I was just being nosy. He said, but I think I'd like to try you for the scan. So I said, yes, so they took me down for the scan, and it was the new one. Do you remember, I don't know whether you remember, the old ultrasound scans had no colour in them, whereas now they show the blood and they show all the different things.
Yeah.
Well, he took me down for the scan, and literally they didn't realise at the time I had been hemorrhaging internally for 3 days. My placenta had erupted. So from having this scan, they rushed me into theatre within 10 minutes, and they said literally 10 minutes longer we'd have both been dead. I'd been hemorrhaging. And literally it was literally kind of like my son's, he's now in his wonderful, he's in his 20s now, and he's done really well. He was very premature, but he's done so well. And literally kind of like I would not be, so somebody must have intervened to get him, to leave those notes out for him to see it. But there's a whole catalogue, and there's been many times like that when it's been sheer fluke that my life has been saved, or that
wow, that's I can share a similar experience actually, because I remember being in Streatham in South London way back, and I was quite young, and I was sat in my car and I had the window down a little bit, and there was this girl, and she had a bottle in her hand, and she was really aggressive, and she came up to the window, and I'm a lover, not a fighter, but if I get pushed, I'll retaliate. I'm not someone to sit there. I can take so much before I'll kind of lose my rag. And she was really aggressive. She was really going for it, and I kind of didn't see the bottle, and I was in this like fight or flight mode. I was like, I feel myself going into fight mode here. And she was clearly drunk and off of it. And I felt exactly the same, that somebody was holding me down and I had no ability to do anything. And I had this voice coming up in my head, and I know it wasn't the voices or me. And all it said was, don't do any, like, it was literally just sit there and take it. Just sit there and take it. And it was, and then I got, she will bottle you, like she's going to bottle you, like just sit there, don't do anything, or she will bottle you. And to this day, I've never been somebody like, it takes a lot for anybody to push my buttons, for me to get aggressive or violent. But I think back then just by default and that age would have just gone for her, because she was going for me. And I'll never forget that. And I genuinely felt like I was being frozen, like forced to just sit.
Absolutely.
So I can really resound with that. And it's funny because you saying about, I think I relate to the sense you have of just knowing things, because when I was in Circle, every time I've ever, worked on psychic retreats and so on, doing my witchy stuff, every time there's a spirit board, I will, or anything they do, I will get a little voice in, and I can always, it's always in the right side of my brain, my right, and I'll just get something come through and I'll say it, and people be like, how do you get that? I always know what the spirit coming through is going to say, and I've said it, and they're like, and actually it's not something it's not something I've always had. It's something that I guess I'm working on, but it's so fascinating. And I said to my mum about this, and she said, that's exactly what your nan's got. She always gets a little voice on the right side. And I was like, oh my goodness, like that is what I have. But my nan has always not accepted or embraced it.
It's sad, isn't it? Because my grandmother was the same, because that's where I get my gift from, I imagine, and she was strict Catholic, so she kind of like, she actually saw and interacted with spirit and spoke to them, but she saw it as something negative because of her beliefs. And how wonderful is it these days that we're able to express, and we're able to go and sit on Circle, because not so long ago you couldn't, it was hidden, it was, and we're so lucky in these days that we're able to kind of talk about these things, because we're talking, to express ourselves in whatever way we see fit.
Absolutely, and not be burnt at the stake for it, because let's be honest,
absolutely.
It would have. And on that note, I wanted to ask you, so how can we strengthen our connection with spirit, and how would you recommend someone can connect to that psychic part of themselves if this is something completely new to them?
Meditation, always meditation, sitting in quiet, sitting in your power, sitting in quiet, sitting on a circle. I always think sitting on a circle and finding, or going to a spiritualist church, or kind of finding, but it's about finding one that fits with you. So not one size fits all. So you may, and it worries me sometimes that people go along to a circle and think, I don't like it, and then won't try. You have to try until, you're lucky if you find the first one that fits you, but find somebody you're comfortable, and with people you're comfortable, and sit and meditate, and always protect yourself. I always say a prayer of protection before I sit and afterwards. So I always ask that a circle of protection be placed around my room, my home, and myself as I sit, because when you're opening up in that way, you're shining a light. So you need to kind of just wrap yourself. But meditation, Carly, finding a quiet moment, because it's in those quiet moments. People quite often say they'll connect with spirit, or they see spirit, or they experience them just as they're going off to sleep, or just as they're waking up. They'll hear, or they'll wake up at early o'clock in the morning, and they'll have a sense of knowing, and that's because you're in a very settled state. You're in that state of mind where you're not going off to sleep, but you're that in between, and that's meditation. That's that kind of and that's when you can connect with that part of you, that spiritual part of you, and with your guides and with your loved ones in that way. But just be quiet and trust that voice.
I agree with that. I love this, and you're so right, because the theta state we enter before we sleep is when we are most open and actually most not creative, like it's when we are most able to be creative, because we're so open-minded in that state. So more has a chance to come through without us rubbishing it and
because in our physical state, or in our day-to-day, we're very weighed down by life and all our worries and all our kind of. So when we get into that theta state, to call it, we're lifted, our vibration is lifted, it's lighter, it's kind of, and through that kind of we're able to connect and align with that, the vibration of spirit, the vibration of kind of that energy that kind of connects with us in that way, that connects us to each other, really, to kind of that universal energy. But I think that's meditation, so important. I think that's the most.
Absolutely. And from working on as a manifestation coach, because that's what I do in my day-to-day, I always say, and this kind of covers both sides of it, which is why I think actually that I get a lot of messages come through, because I work as a manifestation coach, and I always say to people, if you can just give me 10 minutes of your day, could you, for me, before you go to bed, like, try to visualize whatever you're working on manifesting. So see yourself in the vision of what you want, because that's the theta state, again, like that you want to be in. So not only could you pick up psychic messages, you can connect with what you want life to look like. So I ask them to do that for 5 minutes before they go to bed, and I do that religiously, and I see the little visions. So I know this is a different, this is manifesting and a different take on it. But what I do say to them, which links into the spirit side, is every morning, I'm not great at meditating. My mind's very active. I'm a very active person. My brain is always going off on one. But I always say, if you can just give me 5 minutes where you sit in silence, not for some, Buddhist type discipline.
Yeah, absolutely.
Purely, like don't think, oh my goodness, like I've got this thought come up, I need to, throw that out. It's 5 minutes where you give the universe, your spirit guides, angels, whoever you believe in, whoever you work with, my deities, because I've got a really strong relationship with that side. 5 minutes where you don't have any messages coming in, you're not telling the universe what you want, you're not moaning, you're not doing anything, giving them a chance to talk to you. And like, so I'll light a little tea light or some incense, and then I'll just give them 5 minutes. And just say, what would you have me do? Where would you have me go? Or whatever, just to give them the indication, like, I'm ready to hear from you. and that's really what for me.
And I always say, sit with that intention of love. Always sit in a loving, a loving intention to yourself, to spirit. If you kind of have that loving intention, like you say, I'm terrible at meditation. I'm the world's worst. I've got the monkey mind. It goes off, but I just come back to the breath, and I just say, and I allow, because you can't switch your thoughts off. You can't, you know what I mean? And they're going to come in and you can't kind of like get some kind of, you know, that majestic state that some of these monks get, you know, because they practice for years. But you know, life happens, and I'm thinking about the shopping, or did I put the washing on? Did I kind of leave it, you know, and all these things. But I just come back to it and I say, okay, I just accept that my mind's wanted. I bring it back, and like you say, 5 minutes, a couple of minutes, you know, however long it is. You don't have to sit there for half an hour and, you know, in some kind of position where your bum goes numb. And you know, I kind of think that it's just about that, just even 5 minutes, like you say, 5 minutes at a time, but it's so worthwhile. It's just, it can have such an impact on your life, just those 5 minutes of just being quiet, just taking a breath, you know, letting your mind yeah.
And I also find as well, when I do that, I often find I'll get the strangest little nudges from spirit or whoever, you know, just in general, and I'll get a little message come up and I'll genuinely be like, what's that got to do with the price of fish? Like, what is that about? And then I'll just be okay. I've learned now to just accept, okay, I'll take that on board, and then what will happen is something else will happen later that day and I'll be like, that makes sense, that all combines, I get the message, okay, I hear you. Yeah, the trusting side, like don't dismiss the things that come through, no matter how bonkers they seem, because there's often another further piece of information that ties and correlates with it, and it makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I need to ask you, you've given us loads of insight already, but what's the strangest or most memorable moment you've had in relation to spirit? I know you've had ashtrays thrown at you and things like that, but is there one particular story that you love or is just blown your mind that you're happy to share?
Yeah, I've been very lucky, Carly. I've kind of I've had some incredible experiences. I sat on a physical circle for many years, and that was incredible. The things would blow, people wouldn't believe it. It'd blow your mind. But probably the most standout thing for me is I just had my third lot of back surgery, and they'd said to me, basically, we can't do any more. They'd fused my spine. I was walking bent over double. I was still in pain, and they said we can't do any more. And some friends of mine talked about going to a demonstration of healing, and I thought, I'll go along. I've got nothing to lose, and this was like miles away from where I lived. And I was sat in this audience and I was watching people, and they asked as we went in, are you in any pain? And I said, yes, I am, but I didn't say anything about it, or kind of. And I always remember there were people going up and down all night, and they were kind of going up on crutches, and they were coming away walking, and they were going up, and I'm thinking, what a load of rubbish, what have I come here for? And I just remember being very negative and just thinking, you know, because you see these things, don't you, in these kind of like miracle cures, and I was seeing these people go up and just come away, and their neck was moving like it hadn't been before, something like that. And I was very negative, and I sat, and I kind of, be quite honest, I was like, oh God, what am I doing here? And then it got to like the last one of the evening, they started to talk about this woman. They said, oh, you know, she's been through this, that, and then I'm thinking, God, this woman's really ill. She sounds like she's been through, and called my name. And I thought, oh, you're talking about me. And so I went up there, and as I walked around the bed, Paul, the kind of spirit doctor, whispered to me as I walked past, he said, and by the way, your twins are fine. Now, nobody in that room knew that I'd been dropped in theatre, kind of, that's how I damaged my back, but also that I'd lost twins at the same time, that they'd kind of so nobody in that room knew. Nobody had a kind of like, so as I walked around the bed and he told me that they were fine, and then kind of for me that was just like that was enough, really. But then when I sat on the bed, he pressed on my back in 3 places and untrapped every single one of the nerves that had been left trapped by the surgery.
Wow.
For me, that's kind of like, what more proof can you need? Or do I? Yeah. And I see him regularly. They're actually friends of mine, but I see him regularly now. And if my back goes, or if I'm in any pain, I go and see him and he puts it right, because he's just the most incredible healer. But for me, that was just, I mean, for the first 3 years after that, I went to see him, I couldn't speak in his presence. I just was so in awe of kind of what they did and how, you know what I mean? And now I'm very lucky to class them as friends. But yeah, I think, Carly, that's the most incredible.
That's amazing. Honestly, that's given me goosebumps. That is, I love that. Wow. Oh my goodness. This is all a new side to me of Sue. So I've got to say, I've never known any of this, none of these stories, any of this aspect of Sue's life, because she is so good at keeping the two aside, but you've got that lovely spiritual element when it comes to the counselling that has always been a game changer for me. That is the difference, I think, for everybody else that I work with. So I also would love to pick your brain and ask you a few questions, mental health wise, if you don't mind.
Not at all, not at all.
The other side of your work, because you're so good at it. So we talked a little bit about this, but what rituals or practices do you use personally or recommend when it comes to mental health, and why?
Okay, talking is the most important thing, I think, is in to do with mental health. And I kind of think the Americans have it right in some ways because they have regular therapy. I think everybody should talk, because you'd be surprised how many couples come for counselling and they don't talk to each other, or they don't. So I think the most important thing is to talk to somebody. Whatever's going on, whatever you're feeling, is to find somebody safe to talk to, whether it be a family member, a therapist, or talking is just the most healing and the most wonderful thing. So that would be always my kind of first port of call, is to talk. But I think we're so afraid, especially men, of being vulnerable, aren't we? Of showing our vulnerability to somebody. And I think I always think anybody that comes into my counselling room is the bravest soul. I just think they're just incredible to come and to be willing to look and to talk. I think that's so brave. But I think talking is so important. That most important, but there's things like I mean, and I probably have done most of these with you, is journaling, like writing down. So if you can't talk, write it, get those thoughts out of your head, write them down. And one of the best practices I find, because I was very lucky that I came into this kind of way of life after having a nervous breakdown myself. I had a kind of like a breakdown. So I went through the agoraphobia and the panic attacks and all those things. And as awful as it was, for me, they've helped with my practice, because I understand, when someone says to me, I'm having panic attacks, or I know how I felt, I know how debilitating it was. So, I kind of think that's so important to kind of get that help when you and that's what I did. I kind of got that help, but kind of accepting what's going on. So accepting, I think you take the power away from things when you accept what's going on, accept yourself in a certain way. It takes the power away from what's that subconscious control. You know what I mean? That's kind of going on. So I think that's really important, is to kind of accept who you are. But it's okay. However you are, it's okay. As long as you're working on it and talking and doing what you need to do. I think acceptance and gratitude is also the other one. So important to be grateful for what you do have, because I think sometimes when we can sit and just be grateful in the moment, whether it be in the evening or when you go to bed or in the morning, is to just say, what am I grateful for? How lucky am I that I have this roof over my head, or that I have friends, or that I have, you know what I mean, someone, I don't know, those wonderful things. And sometimes that can ground you and kind of let you know that everything's all right. And in that moment, you kind of realize also that our thoughts are just thoughts. It's so important to realize that thoughts aren't real. The thoughts that we have, and especially where we're beating ourselves up or we're being unkind, our thoughts aren't real. Because I can think, oh, I don't know, that the sun is green, but just because I've thought it doesn't mean that it's true. And the same with our thoughts that you have. And I think most people's kind of problems stem from the thoughts, the thoughts about what's going on, and it's about stopping for a moment. And that's a lovely exercise. I don't know whether I've done that with you, Carly, but stop. Stop.
Yeah. In the course of our time together, you've given me so many golden nuggets.
Where stop is, you just think of the word stop. It's got two P's, this stop, though. So you think of the word stop, and the S is just stop. The T is just take a breath. The O is observe what's going on, what's happening, where am I, where are my thoughts, and by stopping and taking a breath, you're doing that. And then P is about pulling back. And when you pull back and you kind of think, well, how would somebody else look at this? Or how would you can then put it into perspective. And that's stopping and just taking a breath is very important, because if you don't do that, our thoughts can then override, and then it kind of spills over to our emotions and our actions. So sometimes by just stopping and taking a breath, you can observe those thoughts. But places like the Mind website, or places that have loads of these tools and things that people can use, or that are really helpful.
You've always given me so many different, you keep things simple, but there's always been another slant or take on something we've done together, because I've worked with you a long time, and actually I've got a full kudos to Sue, because I am probably the happiest I've ever been, and nothing's massively changed externally. It is, you know, internally how I feel, and to the point now where I've had lots of people that have known me when I came to you, like the real dark night of the soul, and said, you know, I don't ever see you really having any like mental health, you know, like issues now. And not saying that like a badge of honor, like, oh, you know, I'm healed, like never. That's a continuous, I have to pay rent on that every day for like, you know, different issues and things that come up for me. But genuinely, when other people start to say to me, oh my goodness, I don't, you're, you know, I don't ever see you like where you were for like 36 years of your, however many years of life it was, you know, before I sort of got to here. And that was when I was like, wow, that is so great to actually have now, you know, because it was like my whole life was just like a shit show really of mental health stuff, which loads of us go through. But it was
but you were honest. And that's the thing. It's about being honest with yourself. It's about, because quite often we don't want others to see it, and we hide things from ourselves, but deep down we know the truth of things. So it's about accepting and being honest. You are who you are. You know, we are kind of like personality wise, we are who we are, and you can't change a lot of that. You just have to learn to work with it, and that acceptance is key to everything. You have to accept what's going on in your life. Am I grieving? Am I feeling? What am I feeling? And it's about accepting, because as soon as you accept, you take the power away from how it drives us, or the emotion it's kind of bringing to us. So, and I kind of think that the wonderful thing about you, Carly, is that you're happy to look at yourself. You're happy, you know what I mean? You're very self-aware, and you're never afraid to touch on something or to go there, which is always kind of helpful.
I feel like really, my cheeks gone really red. I feel like I've just been given like one of those stickers by your teacher. Like, really proud. But no, honestly, it's been such an amazing process, and I'm always like, oh, you know, I've got the best like counselor in the world. But I was gonna say, you've given some insight into this, and you know, because again, like I've learned so much about you today. In terms of the work you do on the mental health side as a counsellor, what did bring you to that? What was the defining moment where you're like, I'm going to go and train to do this?
Well, I kind of think like I'd never had an easy life, so kind of it had always been kind of one thing after another, and then it hit me. I think at one point it hit me, and I had this breakdown, and I just completely I was stuck between. I always remember this one point where I was stuck between kind of, I was agoraphobic, so I couldn't go out, but I was getting panic attacks and claustrophobic of being in. So I used to sit in the mat in between my flat and the doorway at the front. And I remember I used to sit there all night or for hours and just kind of like in this state of panic. And I just remember that just being so awful. And then I was helped. I saw a psychotherapist and I had all this therapy, and I was helped. And I kind of think from that, I kind of thought, this is what I want to do, you know, and maybe I can take what I've been through and use it for good, use it as a stepping stone to help others, rather than think, poor me, you know what I mean, kind of what a victim I've been. I kind of thought, how about I use that to help others, because I understand, I have that empathy, I can connect, and I chose, actually, I started doing regression and hypnotherapy and things like that, but then I realized a lot of the people that came to me for that needed more. They needed more in depth. So that's why I went and did my counselling training, and so that I could kind of, I know what I was doing. I didn't want to leave people kind of with, you know, they'd come in these sessions and they'd be completely laid bare, and then I wouldn't know what to do with them, and they'd go home, and I think I can't do that. So for me, doing the training helped me, one, work on myself so that my stuff didn't come into sessions and my baggage, you know, wasn't kind of, but also that I was able to know what to do, how to lead people, how to kind of be in those sessions. And for me, it's been kind of one of the greatest pleasures of my life doing this work, or being able to kind of be a guiding light, I suppose, or kind of help, because actually as a counsellor or a therapist, it's the client that does all the work in between the sessions. You kind of signpost them or nudge them, or kind of, but actually you're just facilitating that healing and just kind of helping them find their way through it, or their kind of, and maybe sometimes taking them back to a place where they don't want to touch on, to help them heal.
No, honestly, I feel as well the fact that you are open about your struggles, your background, which makes you most relatable and reassuring that you can empathize and understand, you know, because that I think is what makes it anyway for me. But you know, you are so knowledgeable, and I just, yeah, it's just such a good blend. I mean, one thing I want to say, throughout my time having sessions with you, you've often delivered an amazing quote that has resonated, and I've come back to you often. And I literally get this little Sue voice in my head, like, Sue would say this. What are your favorite mottos or quotes that you live by when it comes to mental health?
And it's funny you say that, Carly, because I kind of, that's what happens, is you hope that your clients become their own internal counselor. And actually, when you hear kind of that voice, that makes me laugh when you hear that, because quite often hear a client will say that. But I suppose my favorite and is "This too shall pass." And
I knew you were going to say that one, because I was
yeah. Because it's true. Whatever is going on, this too shall pass. Nothing stays forever. Nothing, kind of like, whether it be good, bad, indifferent, it will always pass. And time is the greatest healer. Although you can't kind of say that to somebody that don't understand it in the moment, it is the greatest healer. And my motto, I suppose, is some beautiful words from St. Paul. It's kind of, my motto is, healing is love. Let everything you do be done in love. And I kind of think if I love that. And also, kind of like, if you think of St. Paul's words about love is patient, love is kind, I kind of try to live that as well, not just for working with clients, but for myself. It's being patient and kind. And I kind of think it's so important to be kind of that. But probably the most important is, this too shall pass. Absolutely. There's nothing that will stay. Because I always remember reading a book called The Road Less Travelled by Scott Peck. Is it Scott M. Peck, something like that? And it was so profound, because I think that one of the first paragraphs in this book said, life is suffering, and once you grasp that, the rest of it becomes easy. And I think actually that sang so true with me, because and I probably said to you, it's about picking your poison, but you know what I mean, it's kind of
I love this analogy.
But the fact is, life is difficult, and it sucks at times, and it's hard, and it's, you know, and nobody's life is easy. Everybody is going through something. Everybody's struggling in one way or another. And I kind of think, once you grasp and accept that it isn't going to be a bed of roses, and it isn't going to be, but there are going to be some wonderful moments, and there are going to be some hard moments, and there's going to be some bits in between, but it will constantly change. Once you accept that life is this flow, and that it's never going to be perfect, and you're not perfect, and, you know, but actually who you are in this moment and how you are is exactly where you're meant to be. You're perfect in that moment. And I think once you realize all of this, life becomes a little bit easier, once you can accept.
Yes.
That's, you know, that nothing is perfect, but also nothing is permanent. Everything moves, everything changes.
You gave me chills then, because I'm sending you out a copy of my book at the moment, and you said about the kindness and patience, and that is at the front of my book, because it's symbolic of my mum and dad had their 40th wedding anniversary, and my brother did a speech, and he said the words that my parents said, that he asked my dad or my mum about what they said about why their marriage, what you could do to keep your marriage working, and one of them had responded, kindness and patience. And it really made me want to, like, I really bawled when he said this during the speech, and, you know, it was really emotional, and I actually put that in the front of the book, like, as a dedication to my parents. So when you said it, I was like, that is so true. Kindness and patience in any way, we can, in relationships, how we treat others, that literally gave me chills. But are you able to talk about the pick your poison analogy a little bit about, I think it was your grandma that had a story about it. This was a real game changer for me, about picking my poison and not beating myself up so much about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I always remember my grandma saying that you have to pick your poison. And I think this is like, and I suppose it's a bit like, you know, like if you're in a relationship or kind of in a friendship or anything, you've always got to pick your poison, because nobody's perfect. So if you kind of think about kind of like, you might meet somebody and say that they're really kind and they're really kind of like and they do everything, but say I don't know, they don't get that right, or they don't, because we're very different, aren't we? I like that is it women of Venus, men are from Mars, or that kind of thing, because we're very different. So sometimes it's about picking your poison, and it's about kind of going, well, I can accept that because I because that makes up for it. So it's about finding balance, that picking your poison, because nothing's ever perfect. So in any situation you go into, you've got to kind of think, is that, can I put up with that? So I get that. It's about finding that balance, or that key. Does that make sense? It's about,
yes, yeah, absolutely. And that was a real, I remember us talking about that, and it being something that always comes to mind, you know, when a situation arises. So yeah, I do love that analogy.
Because people will cut off their nose to spite their face. Sometimes they'll kind of like not do something because of that. And I kind of think, but if you've only got to have that little bit of not nice to have, like, you know what I mean, it kind of it's 97% wonderful, would you not do it just because of 3%? Would you not? But people do.
Yeah,
people will kind of, you know what I mean, they will kind of, you know, because of something little, they'll spoil something kind of that could be quite wonderful. And I kind of think that picking your poison is very much in that way. Or
absolutely. And that's why it came up with us, actually, because it was a situation, I don't remember what situation was, it was a number of years ago, of me cutting my nose off to spite my face. So I absolutely remember it coming up in that context. Okay. And it always comes to mind, you know, when different things arise, I get the little Sue voice in my head with that. And actually, you touched on books. What books or podcasts can you recommend that have been really life-changing, a game changer for you in regards to mental health for yourself or the work that you do?
Well, kind of podcasts are really new to me. I think I must be quite old-fashioned, Carly, because I'm kind of like, this is all new to me. I've been listening to them now and I think, oh, I quite like this. So podcast is something that's very new. So I'm not really kind of afraid with that. But books, I've got kind of two different camps. So I've got certain books that are spiritual and certain books that are kind of counselling wise. So I suppose my counselling ones are, there's a brilliant one called Homecoming. It's about reclaiming and championing your inner child. I kind of think that's a really good one. Some of it's a bit weird and wonderful, but it's really good for inner child work. I think that's kind of good. And then there's another one, Soul Without Shame, and that's about liberating yourself from the judge within, with that inner critic. I also love like Attached. It's to do with anybody with attachment issues or anybody with kind of problems. There's a book called Attached. I think it's Dr. Amir Levine, and it talks about kind of, because I think it's quite a few of us have attachment issues when it comes to relationships or to, you know, to even day to day, and that's a really good book for that. There's another one called I don't know whether I can say it on here, but I'll say FCUK it. There's a
you can say it as much as you like.
Okay, well, it's called Fuck It, and it's kind of like that's a really good. It's called The New Spiritual Way, but I kind of think that's really good for somebody that's just wanting to go. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, let that go, because we spend far too much on weighing things up. So that's a really good book about just letting it go. But then I suppose spiritually, if anybody's wanting to develop, so kind of wanting to learn how to kind of develop themselves mediumistically, wants books to help do that. There's kind of two that kind of would sit me. One of them's Instant Intuition, and that's by Anne Hirsch. And that's really good because it's got some exercises on linking with your guides, that kind of thing. And there's another one good, and I think it's Gordon Smith, Developing Your Mediumship, because his stuff sits very well with me, Gordon Smith. There's another one, if for anybody who's looking for more about knowing what happens after we go, or kind of what happens on the other side, what the spiritual truths are. There's a wonderful book called The Eternal Truth. And do you remember I was telling you the story about the chap that fixed my back?
Yes.
Well, this is a book that he came through, and their spiritual teachings, and they're kind of like, and it's a wonderful book about, and it explains about all the levels in spirit and all the different things, and it's the first book that I've read that thought, God, that resonates with me, that sits so right within me, because you read so many and I think, no, I don't believe that, but this just, everything I believed, it answered, and so for me that's probably one of the most important spiritual books that I've read.
Amazing. Yeah. I'm going to check these out. You did recommend, and I read Attached, and I definitely can rate that was very good.
Yeah.
And I will look into some of those because I'm very curious. And I just want to apologize, when you were talking about the picking your poison, my beautiful, glorious teenage daughter decided to charge in and ask me how her hair looked, not realizing we're recording. No, I do apologize. A bit of real life there happened. So yeah, if you got any sort of slamming doors, my daughter is like a ball in a china shop most of the time. So I do apologize. Keeping it real. So I've loved having you on. Honestly, I've learned so much about you that I never knew, because again, you keep these sides so, you blend it so well, and you also keep it separately wonderfully also. Where can people find you?
Well, I kind of I'm on Facebook. It's probably the easiest way. So under Psychic Susie, you'll find me under Psychic Susie on Facebook. Probably the easiest way, or on Facebook you can add me, Sue Ludden. I think I'm the only one. So yeah, that's the best way to find me is through Facebook and message, and I'm quite happy to help people. If they want answers about anything spiritual, kind of, or anything, just get in touch. I'm quite happy to talk through, have sessions. I do one-on-ones. I do, you know what I mean. And I probably do more of my spiritual stuff than I do my counselling now. But kind of, I'm happy to help in whatever way. We're here to help each other, aren't we? Isn't that why we're here on this earth plane, to kind of, to help each other and make life a little bit easier, because it's hard enough.
Absolutely. And that's something I didn't know. I didn't realize that Sue was doing more of the spiritual stuff, which is exciting. So again, yeah, if you want to contact Sue, I'll put the details in the show notes if you want to explore that on the counselling side or the spiritual side.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Sue, thank you so much. Oh, can I ask you a question really quickly before you go? Yes. So something I ask a lot of our guests: what music do you like to listen to when it comes to your work, if ever that does come up with perhaps the spiritual side of things? What sort of artists and songs do you like to listen to?
Oh wow, it's so varied. It's so kind of but strangely enough, my husband laughs at me with this when I'm getting ready to do on platform, and you're my song is Pour Some Sugar on Me. It's the song I'll listen to as I'm going to, because I don't know what it is about the song, because it's quite a heavy metal one, but it's the drum beat gets me all in a kind of real kind of state, ready to work. It's bizarre, isn't it? But that's kind of like,
I love that.
Yeah. Because meditation, I don't always find I meditate. I quite like drum beat, and I like but I love everything from Elvis to ABBA to kind of like, I'm a big musical buff, so I listen to loads of musical music. But you name it, I suppose. I'm not into dance or kind of or this modern kind of like, I don't kind of get it. Kind of most things. Love a bit of Elvis, love a bit of I'm trying to think what I'm listening to. Ed Sheeran's on play a lot at the moment. His kind of new stuff I quite like, and I love that. Is it the one about having a waiting room or something, which I think is quite lovely. So
I am rubbish with a lot of modern music, to be honest, unless I usually only hear about things through my daughter now. So it's usually some like dodgy grime track or something like that.
I think I've got to that age, Carly, where I'm saying to my sons, and you call this music? I think, oh, Sue.
Yeah, honestly, I literally learned through something all through TikTok, and I'm like, oh, I only know that song because of that. Oh my god, I'm sounding like my mum now. Sue, thank you so much. I've loved having you on. I've learned so much, and I think again, everybody else will from this as well. You've given so much insight into both sides of your work. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. And it's lovely to connect with you in this way, because it's different, isn't it? And it's lovely to be able to talk about what I do and share that with you. So thank you so much for having me, Carly.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for joining me today. On a similar note, I'm working on an additional project this year, secondary to the White Witch podcast, which delves into the supernatural. Therefore, I'd be so keen to hear your ghost stories, if you have any that you'd be happy to share and have read out on a future project that I'll be revealing. I'll be ever so grateful if you have some that you can send in. I will add some details in the show notes where you can send these to, and you can, of course, post them anonymously also. Our theme for March over on my Patreon, The White Witch Coven, is actually Beyond the Veil. This is nothing to do with your ghost stories. That's a separate venture. But this will be a deep delve into our psychic senses and, of course, different spirit-related content. Pretty excited about that, as are most of the Patreon. Our theme for February on Patreon is Fairy Witchcraft. And for £6 a month, you receive a meditation, a fairy tale folklore retelling, Patreon podcast episode, a live recorded workshop that you can re-listen to. We have our book club, the Literary Witches Coven, and we also have our hedge witch studies as well, where we look at different forms of herbs and plants and their witchy related correspondences, properties, folklore, and so on. If you enjoy the show and are happy to give me a review, I'd be ever so grateful. And if you have left me a review, thank you. Honestly, you are all so lovely with your kind comments and messages and so on. It keeps me going. And all your reviews, of course, mean the show is found more, so I can do more. I'll add my socials in the show notes. But thank you all so much for listening. Lots and lots of witchy love.